I promise to pay when I grow up. These 7 words would echo through a convenience store on a bitter December night in Los Angeles, spoken by an 8-year-old girl clutching a baby in a torn towel. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Security cameras recorded every moment. But what they captured wasn't just another transaction. It was the beginning of a miracle. Her name was Zara. Tangled hair hung around her face. Her clothes were stained with dirt and dried tears. Her sneakers had holes that let in the December cold. In her small arms, she held her 14-month-old brother Isaiah, wrapped in the only warm thing they owned, a faded beach towel that smelled of mildew and desperation. Standing nearby, a man in an expensive charcoal suit turned at the sound of that cracked, determined voice. Marcus Thompson, CEO of Thompson Real Estate Development. At 45, he was worth over $500 million. He owned a Beverly Hills mansion. He commanded respect in every boardroom in California. But in that moment, staring at this child who promised to pay for milk with money she didn't have, he felt smaller than he had in years. The store clerk snapped at Zara with the kind of cruelty that comes from working too many night shifts. "Hey, this isn't a daycare. Get out before I call the cops." Zara flinched. Her grip tightened on Isaiah, who whimpered softly against her chest. She started to turn away, shoulders trembling, not from the cold outside, but from the shame of being seen as nothing more than a problem to be removed. That's when Marcus stepped forward. What happened next would change 3 lives forever. But to understand how a chance encounter in a convenience store could reshape destinies, we need to go back. We need to understand how a successful CEO became so empty inside that he filled his evenings with work, and how a young mother and her children ended up promising to pay for basic necessities with hope instead of money. Marcus Thompson's alarm clock rang at 4:47 a.m. every morning, just as it had for the past 8 years. Not 4:45, not 5 o'clock, but 4:47, because that was the exact time Emma used to wake up to catch the sunrise from their bedroom window. It was one of the many small rituals he'd kept alive since losing her, as if maintaining their old schedule could somehow keep her memory from fading. The Beverly Hills mansion echoed with his footsteps as he moved through rooms that had once been filled with laughter and Emma's terrible off-key singing. Now, they held only expensive furniture and the hollow sound of his solitude. The marble countertops in the kitchen gleamed under designer lighting, reflecting nothing but his own tired face as he prepared coffee from beans that cost more per pound than most people spent on groceries in a week. Marcus hadn't always been this way. 20 years earlier, he'd been a young architect with big dreams and bigger debt. Working 18-hour days to build Thompson Real Estate from a single office above a taco shop in Van Nuys. Emma had been his anchor then, a pediatric nurse who brought warmth to their tiny apartment and believed in his vision, even when he didn't believe in himself. "You're going to change this city," she'd tell him, tracing the blueprints spread across their second-hand dining table. "You're going to build homes where families will grow old together, where children will take their first steps, where people will feel safe." She'd been right, of course. Marcus had changed Los Angeles one development at a time. Thompson Real Estate now owned over $3 billion in properties across Southern California. His name was etched in brass plaques in building lobbies throughout the city. Business magazines featured him on their covers. They called him a visionary, a game changer, the man who'd revolutionized affordable luxury housing. But success had come with a price that no amount of money could ever repay. Emma had wanted children desperately. They'd tried for years, celebrating with champagne when pregnancy tests showed 2 pink lines, only to have their hopes shattered weeks later. 3 miscarriages in 4 years had taken pieces of Emma's spirit that never quite grew back. The doctors spoke in gentle clinical terms about fertility challenges and alternative options. But Marcus could see his wife disappearing behind a smile that became more forced with each passing month. The final miscarriage happened on a Tuesday in March. Marcus had been in Phoenix closing a deal on a luxury resort development when Emma called. Her voice was so quiet, he had to press the phone against his ear to hear her whispered words. "We lost the baby, Marcus. I lost our baby." He'd caught the first flight home, abandoning a $50 million contract to hold his wife as she sobbed in their empty nursery. They'd painted the walls yellow because they'd wanted to be surprised by their baby's gender. Now the cheerful color seemed to mock them. Sunshine in a room that would never hold the laughter they'd dreamed of. That night, as Emma slept fitfully beside him, Marcus made a promise to himself. He would give her everything else instead. If they couldn't have the family they'd planned, he would build an empire that would give her every luxury, every comfort, every beautiful thing the world had to offer. For 5 years, he kept that promise. The business exploded beyond even Marcus's ambitious dreams. They moved to the Beverly Hills mansion, took trips to Dubai and the Maldives, owned cars worth more than most people's houses. Emma had the best of everything, except the one thing she truly wanted. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that a man who'd built his fortune creating homes for families couldn't create a family of his own. The accident happened on a Thursday evening in October. Emma had been driving home from the hospital where she'd returned to work as a way to be around the children she couldn't have. A drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection of Sunset and Vine, smashing into the passenger side of Emma's Mercedes at 60 miles per hour. Marcus had been in a board meeting when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Cedars-Sinai Hospital. Something cold settled in his stomach even before he answered. "Mr. Thompson, this is Dr. Patricia Wells at Cedars-Sinai. I need you to come in immediately. There's been an accident involving your wife." The next 6 hours blurred together like scenes from someone else's nightmare. Sterile hospital corridors, the steady beep of machines, doctors speaking in hushed tones about traumatic brain injuries and slim chances. Emma never woke up. After 3 days on life support, with no brain activity and no hope of recovery, Marcus made the most difficult decision of his life. He held her hand as the machines were turned off, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "I'll be okay," he told her still form. "I'll find a way to be okay." But he wasn't okay. Not even close. In the 8 years since Emma's death, Marcus had thrown himself into work with an intensity that worried his few remaining friends. Thompson Real Estate expanded into commercial developments, hotel chains, even a division focused on sustainable housing for low-income families, a project Emma had encouraged him to pursue. The company's valuation soared past the billion-dollar mark, making Marcus one of the wealthiest real estate developers on the West Coast. Yet every evening, he returned to a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Emma's coffee mug still sat in the kitchen cabinet, unwashed since the morning she died. Her favorite books remained bookmarked on pages she'd never finished reading. Her perfume bottle sat on the bathroom counter, still holding enough of her scent to break his heart when he accidentally brushed against it. Marcus had tried dating, half-heartedly accepting invitations from well-meaning friends who insisted he needed to get back out there. But every dinner conversation felt forced, every smile hollow. How do you explain to someone that you're not mourning just a wife, but an entire future that died with her? How do you describe the weight of living in a house designed for a family that would never exist? So he worked. 16-hour days became 18-hour days. Board meetings bled into conference calls that stretched past midnight. His assistant Margaret had stopped bothering to book him personal appointments because she knew he'd cancel them anyway. His calendar was a monument to productivity and a testament to loneliness. Meanwhile, in a very different part of Los Angeles, Keisha Williams had learned to count in moments instead of hours. The moment when Isaiah's cries would wake the people sleeping nearby, forcing them to move to a new spot. The moment when store owners would notice them lingering too long, triggering another humiliating conversation about loitering policies. The moment when Zara's stomach would growl so loudly that she'd press her small hands against her belly and whisper, "I'm not hungry, Mama," even though they both knew she was lying. At 28, Keisha looked older than her years. The stress of keeping 2 children alive without a home had carved lines around her eyes and streaked premature gray through her dark hair. Her hands, once steady enough to start IVs on premature babies, now shook whenever she had to ask strangers for help. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, but it was the hardest thing she'd ever learned to set aside. 6 months earlier, Keisha had been a different person entirely. She'd worn scrubs to work at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, where she'd specialized in pediatric intensive care. Her small apartment in Silver Lake wasn't much. A 1-bedroom with thin walls and a temperamental air conditioner. But it was theirs. Zara had her own corner with books and art supplies. The refrigerator hummed with the ordinary sounds of a functioning life. The transformation from nurse to homeless mother hadn't happened overnight. It had been a slow slide, like falling down a hill that seemed manageable until you realized you couldn't stop. It started when Marcus Thompson was arrested for dealing cocaine outside an elementary school in Riverside. Not the Marcus who would save them, but the Marcus who had destroyed them. Keisha had been 8 months pregnant with Isaiah at the time, her belly round and heavy with the future she'd planned so carefully. She'd thought she was building a family with a man who loved her. Instead, she'd been building a life with someone who saw her as a convenient cover for his criminal activities. "I was just holding it for a friend," Marcus Thompson had insisted from his jail cell. The same lie every dealer tells when the handcuffs click shut. But the police had found text messages on his phone, evidence of months of sales. A witness who testified that he'd been operating his drug business out of their apartment building. The arrest made the local news. Keisha's photo appeared alongside Marcus Thompson's mugshot, identified as his live-in girlfriend and mother of his unborn child. The image was grainy and unflattering, taken during her perp walk as police searched their apartment for evidence. She looked exactly like what the world assumed she was. Just another woman who'd chosen the wrong man and deserved whatever consequences followed. Children's Hospital Los Angeles had a strict policy about employees with criminal associations. The policy was designed to protect vulnerable patients from potential harm, but it didn't account for women like Keisha, who'd been as deceived as everyone else. Her supervisor, Dr. Patel, had been apologetic but firm during their meeting. "I know you're not involved, Keisha," he'd said, unable to meet her eyes. "But the board is concerned about perception. Parents need to trust that their children are safe here until this situation is resolved." The phrase administrative leave sounded professional and temporary, but Keisha understood its real meaning. She was being fired for loving the wrong person. Isaiah was born 3 weeks later in the charity ward of a different hospital, the one that accepted uninsured patients and didn't ask too many questions about their circumstances. Keisha held her son for the first time in a room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'm going to take care of you," she told the tiny boy who'd inherited her dark eyes and his father's stubborn chin. "I'm going to make sure you're safe and loved and have everything you need." She'd meant every word, but meaning something and being able to do it turned out to be very different things. Without her nursing income, Keisha burned through her savings in 2 months. The apartment she'd shared with Marcus Thompson was a crime scene sealed off while investigators gathered evidence of his drug dealing. Even if she could have returned, she wouldn't have wanted to. Too many neighbors had seen the news reports. Too many people looked at her with suspicion and judgment, wondering what she'd known and when she'd known it. She found a cheaper place in Van Nuys, a studio apartment above a laundromat, where the machines ran all night and the walls were thin enough to hear every argument, every crying baby, every life falling apart in slightly different ways than her own. Zara, only 7, then adapted with the resilience that children somehow possess. She helped fold their clothes, learned to be quiet during Isaiah's naps, never complained when dinner was peanut butter sandwiches for the 4th night in a row. Keisha applied for jobs with desperate determination. She filled out applications at hospitals, clinics, nursing homes, anywhere that might value her experience. But the background checks always came back the same way. Employers would call to schedule interviews, their voices warm and professional, then call back a few days later with carefully worded explanations about liability concerns and insurance requirements. The association with Marcus Johnson's arrest had made her unemployable in healthcare, the only field she'd ever known. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, taped to her door in an envelope marked "Urgent" in red letters. 30 days to pay 3 months of back rent or find somewhere else to live. Keisha stared at the numbers on the page. $2,847. She might as well have been asked to produce $2 million. She tried everything. Called family members who'd already made it clear they couldn't help. Applied for emergency assistance programs that had waiting lists longer than her remaining time in the apartment. Sold everything of value she owned, including her grandmother's wedding ring and the textbooks from nursing school that she'd once thought might help her advance in her career. Nothing was enough. On the day they were evicted, Keisha packed their belongings into 2 suitcases and a diaper bag. Zara helped without being asked, folding her clothes with the same precise care she'd learned from watching her mother prepare for work. Isaiah babbled happily in his car seat, too young to understand that they were leaving the only stable home he'd ever known. "Where are we going?" Mama Zara asked, as they walked away from the apartment building, their suitcases rolling behind them, like the sound of their old life disappearing. "Somewhere safe," Keisha answered, hoping it was true. That first night, they slept in Keisha's 10-year-old Honda Civic in the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart. The car was too small for all of them, so Keisha gave the back seat to Zara and Isaiah while she dozed upright in the driver's seat, waking every few minutes to make sure they were safe. The security guard made his rounds every hour, shining his flashlight through the windows, but not asking them to move on. Small mercies in a world that seemed determined to offer nothing else. The second night they tried a different Walmart. This security guard was less understanding. "You can't sleep here," he said, tapping on the window with his flashlight. "There are shelters for people like you." People like you. The phrase followed them everywhere, spoken with varying degrees of sympathy and disgust. People like you who make bad choices. People like you who should have planned better. People like you who don't deserve the same basic human dignity as everyone else. The shelters were full, every single one. Keisha called dozens of them, listening to the same recorded message about capacity limits and waiting lists. The few that offered immediate assistance required families to be separated. Men in one building, women and children in another. Even if Marcus Johnson hadn't been in prison, even if he'd been the kind of man who would have helped instead of hurt, they wouldn't have been allowed to stay together. So they lived in the car. Then when the car broke down and couldn't be repaired, they lived wherever they could find space. A corner of MacArthur Park where the police didn't patrol regularly. An alcove behind a Korean church where the congregation sometimes left boxes of food. Finally, the space under the Interstate 405 overpass, where a small community of homeless families had created an informal neighborhood of cardboard and hope. Zara adapted with heartbreaking grace. She learned to pack their few belongings quickly when they needed to move. She helped care for Isaiah, changing his diapers, and singing him to sleep when Keisha was too exhausted to function. She drew pictures on scraps of paper she found, creating art from garbage and giving it to her mother like precious gifts. "This is us," she'd say, showing Keisha stick figure drawings of their family. "And this is our house," she'd add, pointing to a rectangle with windows and a door and smoke coming from a chimney they'd never owned. Isaiah grew from a baby into a toddler during their months on the street. He learned to walk on concrete instead of carpet, took his first steps between a shopping cart full of their possessions and a cardboard sign that read, "Homeless family, anything helps, God bless." His first words were, "Mama" and "Zara" and "hungry," a vocabulary shaped by their circumstances. Keisha watched her children adapt to homelessness with a mixture of pride and horror. They were surviving, which was more than she dared hope for during those first terrifying weeks. But survival wasn't living. She knew that every day they spent on the street was a day stolen from the childhood they deserved. The night they met Marcus Thompson, Keisha had been sick for 3 days with what she thought might be pneumonia. Her chest burned with each breath. She'd been coughing so hard that she'd tasted blood. But Isaiah was out of formula, and Zara hadn't eaten anything substantial in 36 hours. Staying in their spot under the overpass wasn't an option, not when her children needed food. She'd sent Zara into the convenience store with the last of their money, $3.47 in crumpled bills and dirty coins. Instructions to buy the cheapest milk she could find. The plan was simple. Formula for Isaiah, milk for Zara, and hope that tomorrow would somehow be better than today. When Zara came back outside, empty-handed, her small face flushed with embarrassment, Keisha felt something inside her break completely. Not just break, shatter. Like a window hit by a stone, sending spiderweb cracks in every direction, until the whole thing collapsed into pieces, too small to ever fit back together. "The milk costs $4.29, Zara whispered, holding out the money like an apology. "I told them I promised to pay when I grow up, but the man said, 'That's not how stores work.'" Keisha pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her unwashed hair and feeling the sharp edges of her own failure. She'd been a nurse once. She'd saved lives, comforted frightened parents, made a difference in the world. Now she couldn't even buy milk for her own children. That's when a stranger stepped out of the store behind them, carrying a bag of groceries and wearing an expression she hadn't seen in months. Not pity, not judgment, not the careful indifference that most people use to avoid seeing homeless families. Kindness. Pure, simple kindness, offered without conditions or expectations. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice gentle in the harsh fluorescent light spilling from the store. "I think you forgot something inside." He held out the gallon of milk that Zara hadn't been able to buy, along with a bag containing formula diapers, bread, and canned soup. More food than they'd seen in one place for weeks. Keisha stared at him, this well-dressed stranger who'd noticed them when the rest of the world worked so hard to look away. She wanted to say thank you, wanted to explain that they weren't the kind of people who usually needed help, wanted to promise that this was temporary and they'd find a way to pay him back. Instead, she started to cry. Not the silent, careful tears she'd learned to shed when her children were sleeping. These were the deep, body-shaking sobs of someone who'd been holding her breath for months and could finally exhale. They were the tears of a mother who'd been drowning and had just felt solid ground beneath her feet. The stranger didn't rush to comfort her or offer empty reassurances about how everything would be okay. He simply waited, holding the groceries and giving her the space to fall apart without judgment. When she could finally speak, Keisha managed to whisper the words that would change all their lives. "Thank you. We don't usually. We're not usually." "You don't have to explain," Marcus said softly. "Everyone needs help sometimes. The only difference is that some of us are better at hiding it." As they walked back toward the overpass that night, Zara carrying the milk like a treasure, and Isaiah finally quiet after a full bottle. Keisha allowed herself to hope for the first time in months. Not for miracles or fairy tale endings, but for something simpler and more precious. The possibility that tomorrow might be different than today. She had no way of knowing that the man who'd bought them groceries would be back the next morning with more food and a question that would change everything. What if this didn't have to be temporary? The next morning, Marcus arrived at the overpass with fresh pastries from a bakery in Santa Monica and a bag of clothes he'd guessed at in various sizes. He'd spent the night in his empty mansion, unable to stop thinking about Zara's promise and the quiet desperation in her mother's voice. Finding them again took patience. The area under the overpass was larger than it had seemed in the dark. Dozens of people had claimed small territories among the concrete support pillars. Marcus walked carefully between makeshift shelters, made of cardboard and tarps, nodding respectfully to the people who watched him with suspicious eyes. He was obviously out of place here. His clothes, too clean, his shoes too expensive, his presence too purposeful for someone who belonged in this forgotten corner of the city. Some residents ignored him completely. Others called out offers to help him find whatever he was looking for, assuming he was either lost or looking to buy something he couldn't get in more legitimate places. Marcus was beginning to worry that they'd moved on when he heard a familiar voice singing softly. Following the sound, he found Zara sitting cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box, holding Isaiah in her lap and singing what sounded like a lullaby made up of nonsense words and pure love. Rock-a-bye Isaiah in the treetops. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. And Zara will catch you, baby and all. She looked up when she saw his shadow fall across their small space. Her face lit up with the kind of joy that made Marcus's chest tighten. Mama Zara called over her shoulder. "The nice man is back." Keisha emerged from behind a makeshift privacy screen constructed from shopping carts and an old shower curtain. She looked better than she had the night before. She'd found somewhere to wash her face and had braided her hair back neatly, but her eyes still held the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust good fortune. "I brought some things," Marcus said, setting down the bakery bags. "I wasn't sure what sizes." Keisha stared at the bags like they might disappear if she looked away. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Marcus said. "I wanted to." The conversation that followed was careful, tentative. Two people from completely different worlds trying to understand each other's motivations. Marcus learned about Keisha's nursing background, about the arrest that had destroyed her career, about the months of gradual descent from working professional to homeless mother. Keisha learned that Marcus was alone in the world, that he'd lost his wife 8 years earlier and had been living in an empty mansion ever since, that his success felt meaningless without someone to share it with. When Marcus suggested finding them somewhere safer to stay, Keisha's first instinct was to refuse. "We're fine here," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I'm sure you are," Marcus replied carefully. "But it's supposed to rain this week, and Isaiah is so young." Zara looked up from examining the clothes Marcus had brought. "What kind of somewhere?" "Mr. Marcus." "A hotel room," Marcus said, "with real beds and a bathroom and a place to cook food. Just for a few days, while we figure out something more permanent." "We can't pay you back," Keisha said quietly. "I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking for?" It was a fair question. Marcus realized he didn't have a simple answer. What did he want from this family? Why was he offering help to strangers when he'd spent 8 years avoiding meaningful connections with anyone? "I lost my wife," he said finally. 8 years ago. We never had children. This house is very quiet." Keisha studied his face, perhaps hearing something in his voice that explained more than his words. "I'm sorry for your loss." Emma would have loved Zara. Marcus said, surprising himself with the admission. She worked with children at the hospital. She always said they were the best part of her day. The hotel Marcus chose was a modest but clean extended stay place in Culver City. Nice enough to be safe and comfortable, but not so luxurious that Keisha would feel out of place. He'd called ahead to ensure they had a room with a kitchenette and had arranged for basic groceries to be delivered before they arrived. As they gathered their few possessions, Marcus was struck by how little space a family's entire life could occupy. Everything they owned fit into 2 garbage bags and a broken suitcase held together with duct tape. Zara carefully folded her new clothes and placed them on top of their other belongings, like they were made of crystal. The drive to the hotel was quiet, except for Isaiah's babbling and the soft sound of Zara humming to herself in the back seat. Keisha sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's Porsche, her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring out the window at a world that probably looked different when viewed from inside a car that cost more than most people made in a year. When they arrived at the hotel, Marcus checked them in and handed Keisha the key cards. "Room 237, he said. "The groceries should already be there." Keisha took the key cards like they might burn her fingers. "Why are you doing this?" It was the second time she'd asked. Marcus still didn't have a complete answer. "Because I can," he said. "And because someone should." That's not really an answer. Marcus looked at Zara, who was holding Isaiah on her hip and staring up at the hotel building like it was a palace. "Maybe it's the only answer I have right now." In the elevator, Zara pressed her face against the glass wall and watched the parking lot shrink below them. "We're so high up," she exclaimed. "I can see everything." When they reached the second floor and found room 237, Marcus used his key card to open the door and stepped aside to let them enter first. The room was simple but clean. 2 double beds, a small kitchenette, a table by the window, and a bathroom with a shower that actually produced hot water. Zara ran to the window and looked out at the courtyard below, where other families were swimming in a small pool. "Mama, there are kids playing," Keisha said. Isaiah on one of the beds and looked around the room with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Relief maybe mixed with disbelief, and something that might have been grief for all the nights they'd spent sleeping on concrete when something this simple was possible. "The groceries are in the kitchenette," Marcus said. "And there's a washer and dryer down the hall. The front desk has the tokens." "Thank you," Keisha said quietly. "This is really nice." "I'll check on you tomorrow," Marcus said. "Make sure you have everything you need. You don't have to do that." "I know," Marcus said. "But I'd like to if that's okay." Keisha nodded. Marcus headed toward the door. He was almost in the hallway when Zara's voice stopped him. "Mr. Marcus!" He turned back. "Yes. Are you an angel?" The question caught him off guard. For a moment he couldn't speak. When he found his voice, it came out rougher than he'd intended. "No, sweetheart. I'm just a person who wanted to help." "That's what angels do," Zara said matter-of-factly. "They help people when they need it most." Marcus looked at Keisha, who was watching their interaction with tears in her eyes. "Well," he said to Zara, "if that's true, then maybe you're an angel too. You've been helping your mama and your brother this whole time." Zara considered this seriously. "Maybe we're all angels," she said finally. "Maybe we just don't know it yet." As Marcus drove home that night, Zara's words echoed in his mind. "Maybe we're all angels. Maybe we just don't know it yet." It was the kind of profound simplicity that only seemed to come from children, who hadn't yet learned to complicate the basic human impulse to care for one another. For the first time in 8 years, Marcus fell asleep easily, and for the first time since Emma's death, he woke up looking forward to the day ahead. The next few weeks established a rhythm that surprised Marcus with its naturalness. He would arrive each morning with coffee for Keisha and fresh fruit for the children. They'd have breakfast together sometimes, venturing out to explore different parts of the city. The Santa Monica Pier Griffith Observatory, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, places that were free or affordable, and gave Zara and Isaiah new experiences to balance their difficult memories. Keisha had started working part-time at a small clinic in Venice that served undocumented immigrants and others who couldn't access traditional health care. The job paid modestly and didn't require the kind of background check that had disqualified her from hospital positions. More importantly, it let her use her nursing skills again, reminded her that she was more than her circumstances. Marcus had enrolled Zara in a nearby elementary school, handling the paperwork and fees without making it seem like charity. Zara thrived in the classroom environment, making friends quickly and bringing home artwork that Marcus proudly displayed in his office. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, commented on how mature and empathetic Zara was, how she always helped classmates who were struggling. "She has an old soul," Mrs. Rodriguez had told Marcus during a parent-teacher conference. "You can tell she's seen more of the world than most children her age, but she hasn't let it make her hard." Isaiah was walking more confidently now, babbling in the mix of English and toddler speak that delighted everyone who met him. He'd learned to associate Marcus with fun, games of peek-a-boo trips to feed ducks at Echo Park Lake, and bedtime stories read in Marcus's increasingly confident voice. The hotel room had begun to feel like home. Keisha had arranged their few possessions with care, creating cozy spaces within the limited square footage. Zara's artwork covered one wall. Isaiah's toys were organized in a corner near the window. Family photos, new ones that Marcus had taken during their outings, sat on the small dresser. Marcus found himself reluctant to leave each evening, prolonging their dinners together and volunteering to help with bedtime routines. His mansion in Beverly Hills felt more empty than ever, in contrast to the warmth of room 237, where every square foot held evidence of love and resilience. He'd begun to think about making more permanent arrangements. Perhaps a small house where they could have more space, where Zara could have her own room and Isaiah could have a yard to play in. He'd started researching neighborhoods with good schools and parks, imagining a future that went beyond temporary hotel stays. That future shattered on a Thursday evening in November when Marcus arrived for dinner and found the hotel room empty. Not just empty, abandoned. The beds were made with military precision, the bathroom spotless, every surface wiped clean. The few possessions they'd accumulated were gone, along with the artwork on the walls and the photos on the dresser. Even the small stuffed elephant that Isaiah carried everywhere was missing. Marcus stood in the doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs as he tried to process what he was seeing. They wouldn't have left voluntarily. Keisha had been happier than he'd ever seen her, talking about the future with genuine optimism for the first time since they'd met. Zara loved her new school and had made plans with classmates for the weekend. Isaiah was thriving in their stable environment. Something had scared them away. Someone had scared them away. Marcus ran to the front desk, where the clerk on duty, a young man named David, who'd grown fond of the children, looked as confused as Marcus felt. "They checked out this morning," David said, consulting his computer. "Early, maybe 6 a.m. The lady seemed nervous, kept looking over her shoulder. "Did she say where they were going?" "No, sir. But she asked about bus routes to downtown. Seemed like she was in a hurry." Marcus's blood ran cold. Downtown LA was where the largest homeless encampments were located, where people went when they needed to disappear quickly into the anonymous mass of the dispossessed. If Keisha had taken the children there, finding them would be nearly impossible. Did anyone else come looking for them? Anyone ask questions about room 237? David's expression grew troubled. "Actually, yes. Yesterday evening after you left. A man came to the desk asking about a woman with 2 kids. Described them pretty accurately. Said he was family, that he'd been looking for them. What did you tell him? Nothing, David said quickly. We don't give out guest information. But he seemed intense. Made me uncomfortable. I told security to keep an eye out. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air conditioning. Can you describe him? Big guy. Maybe 2'6'3". Muscular, like he worked out a lot. Had tattoos on his arms. Wore a lot of jewelry. Gold chains, rings. Looked like money, but not the clean kind, if you know what I mean. Marcus knew exactly what he meant. The description sounded like trouble. Like the kind of man who might have connections to Marcus Johnson, the father who'd destroyed Keisha's life with his criminal activities. Did he give a name? Saeed, his name was Damon. Damon Carter. Claimed to be the father of the baby. Damon Carter. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't just about finding a missing family anymore. This was about protecting them from someone who clearly meant them harm. Marcus thanked David and drove straight to his office, where he had resources that most people didn't. Within an hour, he'd hired a private investigator named Michael Santos, a former LAPD detective who specialized in finding missing persons. Santos was expensive, discreet, and had a reputation for results. Tell me everything you know about this family, Santos said, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk with a notepad and a recorder. Marcus found himself sharing details he hadn't realized he'd memorized. Keisha's maiden name, the hospital where she'd worked Zara's birthday, Isaiah's favorite foods, the names of teachers and social workers who might have had contact with them. He described their routines, their fears, the places they'd found safety, and the ones that made them nervous. What about this Damon Carter? Santos asked. Any idea what his connection is to the family? Marcus shook his head. Keisha mentioned that Isaiah's father was named Marcus Johnson, that he was in prison for drug dealing. But she was always vague about the details. Maybe there were multiple men involved, or maybe she was protecting Isaiah from the truth about his father. Or maybe this Damon Carter is connected to Marcus Johnson, partner's family, someone with a grudge. I'll run background checks on both names, see what comes up. How long will this take? Santos studied Marcus's face, probably reading the desperation there. Missing persons cases can take weeks or months, especially when people don't want to be found. But if they're in downtown LA, I have contacts who might have seen them. Street people notice new families, especially ones with young children. Money is no object, Marcus said. Whatever it takes. I understand. But Mr. Thompson, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that they don't want to be found. If this woman ran from you without explanation, there might be reasons you don't know about. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. Had he misread the situation? Had Keisha been planning to leave all along, just waiting for the right moment? Had the warmth he'd felt between them been gratitude, rather than genuine affection? She seemed happy. He said more to himself than to Santos. They all did. People can seem happy and still be scared, Santos said gently. Especially people who've been hurt before. Sometimes running feels safer than staying, even when staying is objectively better. That night, Marcus didn't go home to his empty mansion. Instead, he drove through downtown Los Angeles, looking for any sign of Keisha and the children. He stopped at every encampment, every shelter, every place where homeless families might seek refuge. He showed their photos to anyone willing to look, offering cash rewards for information. Most people shook their heads sympathetically. A few claimed to have seen them, but provided descriptions that clearly didn't match. One elderly woman at a shelter near Union Station studied the photos carefully before speaking. Pretty lady, 2 babies. Yeah, I might have seen them. Yesterday, maybe the day before. She looked scared, kept checking over her shoulder. The little girl was trying to comfort her mama like she was the grown-up. "Did you see where they went?" "Sorry, honey. People come and go around here. But if she's smart, she'll stay away from the big camps. Too many people asking questions. Too easy to find someone who doesn't want to be found." Marcus thanked her and continued his search until nearly dawn, finally returning home as the sun rose over the Hollywood Hills. He'd found nothing, learned nothing, helped nothing. For all his wealth and connections and resources, he was powerless to protect the people who'd come to mean everything to him. His phone rang as he was pouring his third cup of coffee. Santos's name appeared on the screen. "I found something," the investigator said without preamble. "Damon Carter, age 34. Multiple arrests for drug dealing, domestic violence, and assault. Did 18 months in state prison, released 4 months ago. And here's the interesting part. He was cellmates with Marcus Johnson." Marcus set down his coffee cup carefully. Isaiah's father. Right. According to prison records, they were tight. Carter was Johnson's protection inside, and Johnson was financing Carter's drug business on the outside through family connections. When Johnson got arrested, it disrupted Carter's supply chain. He lost a lot of money and blamed Johnson's girlfriend, your Keisha. So this isn't about wanting his family back. This is about revenge. Looks that way. And Mr. Thompson Carter has a history of violence against women. 3 different girlfriends filed restraining orders against him over the past 5 years. If he's hunting this family, it's not for a reunion. Marcus felt ice settle in his stomach. Somewhere in the city, Keisha was trying to keep her children safe from a man who saw them as objects to be owned or obstacles to be eliminated. And Marcus, for all his money and good intentions, had no idea where they were or how to help them. "Keep looking," he told Santos. "Every shelter, every camp, every place someone might hide with children. I don't care what it costs." "Already on it," Santos replied. "But Mr. Thompson, if we find them, we need to be prepared for the possibility that they won't trust you either. From their perspective, you're just another man trying to control their lives." Marcus hung up the phone and stared out the window at the city that had made him rich, but couldn't help him save the people he'd come to love. Somewhere out there, Zara was probably trying to comfort her mother, while Isaiah cried from hunger or cold or fear. Somewhere out there, a little girl who'd promised to pay for milk when she grew up was learning that sometimes, even the kindest strangers couldn't protect you from the cruelest ones. For the first time since Emma's death, Marcus Thompson felt truly helpless. And for the first time since meeting Keisha's family, he understood that love, real love, meant being willing to lose everything to keep someone else safe, even if they never knew you tried. Santos called every few hours with updates, most of them disappointing. The homeless community was protective of families with children, especially when those families seemed to be running from something dangerous. Even people who'd clearly seen Keisha, Zara, and Isaiah claimed to know nothing, their faces closing off the moment Santos showed his credentials. "They think I'm a cop," Santos explained during one of their phone calls. "And cops usually mean child services, which means families get separated. They're not going to give up a mother and her kids to someone who might put those babies in foster care." "What if I go myself?" Marcus asked. "I'm not a cop. I don't look like child services. You look like money, Mr. Thompson. And money makes people nervous down here too. They'll think you're either slumming for a story or looking to exploit someone's desperation." "There has to be something we're missing," Marcus said. "Someplace they'd go that we haven't thought of." "I've been thinking about that," Santos replied. "Your Keisha used to be a nurse, right? She's got medical training, knows how to care for people. What if she's not just hiding? What if she's working where underground clinics, street medics, places that serve undocumented immigrants or people who can't access regular health care? They always need nurses, and they don't ask questions about backgrounds or legal status. Marcus felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. It made perfect sense. Keisha wouldn't want to be completely dependent on the charity of strangers, especially if she was trying to save money to run further from Damon Carter. And her nursing skills were the one thing that couldn't be taken away by circumstances or background checks. Where do we start? There's a clinic in Boyle Heights that's been operating out of a converted warehouse for about 6 months. Technically illegal, but the cops look the other way because they're helping people who wouldn't get help otherwise. If I were a nurse trying to disappear, that's where I'd go. The clinic occupied the ground floor of a building that had once manufactured textiles, tucked between a tire shop and a check cashing place on Cesar Chavez Boulevard. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Windows covered with brown paper, no signs or advertisements. Just a small white cross, painted on the door, that could have been graffiti. Marcus and Santos arrived separately, with Santos going in first to scout the situation. Marcus waited in his car for 20 minutes, watching a steady stream of people enter and exit the unmarked building. Elderly Latino men with construction-damaged hands, young mothers carrying babies and toddlers, teenagers who looked like they'd been living on the street for weeks. When Santos emerged, his expression was carefully neutral. "She's here," he said quietly, sliding into the passenger seat of Marcus's car. "Working under the name Kelly Williams instead of Keisha, but it's definitely her. The kids are here too, staying in a small room in the back of the building." Marcus felt his heart rate spike. "How do they look? Are they okay?" "Thin. Tired. The little girl looks like she's been crying. The baby seems healthy enough, but your Keisha looks like she hasn't slept in days. She's jumpy, constantly checking the exits, watching everyone who comes through the door." "Did she see you?" "No. I pretended to be a patient with a work injury." But Marcus Santos paused, his expression growing more serious. "There's something else. I saw Damon Carter's car parked 2 blocks away. A black Escalade with custom rims. License plate that matches his registration. He's found them." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Is he inside? No. But he's close. And if I found this place by thinking like someone who needs to disappear, he probably found it the same way. Street people talk, especially if you wave enough cash around." Marcus stared at the clinic entrance, knowing that Keisha and the children were just a few hundred feet away, but might as well have been on another planet. If he walked in there now, Keisha would probably run again, assuming he was working with Damon or couldn't be trusted to keep them safe. But if he didn't act soon, Damon might make his move, and Marcus would never forgive himself for standing by while someone hurt the people he'd come to love. "We call the police," Marcus said finally. Santos shook his head. "Call them about what a man parked legally on a public street. Carter hasn't committed any crimes we can prove, and your Keisha isn't going to file a complaint against him. She's too scared, and she doesn't trust the system. Then what do? We wait, we watch, and we hope we can get to them before he does." They sat in Marcus's car for 3 hours, taking turns watching the clinic entrance and scanning the surrounding streets for signs of Damon Carter. The neighborhood was busy enough to provide cover. Enough foot traffic and parked cars that they didn't stand out as surveillance. But Marcus felt exposed anyway, like they were sitting in a spotlight that anyone could see. At 4 p.m., the black Escalade moved. Santos spotted it first, nudging Marcus as the SUV turned onto Cesar Chavez Boulevard and cruised slowly past the clinic. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but the vehicle's predatory pace, too slow for normal traffic, too fast for someone looking for an address, made its intentions clear. "He's making his move," Santos said, already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling backup." "What backup guys? I know from my LAPD days. They owe me favors, and they don't like men who hurt women and children. Marcus watched the Escalade disappear around a corner, knowing it would be back. Damon Carter had found his prey, and now he was circling, looking for the right moment to strike. The thought of Zara and Isaiah caught in the middle of whatever confrontation was coming made Marcus feel sick. There has to be another way, he said. Such as Marcus stared at the clinic entrance, where a steady stream of people continued to enter and exit, unaware that violence was circling their small sanctuary like a shark. I go in and warn them, give them a chance to run before he comes back. And then what they run, he follows, and we're right back where we started. Except next time, we might not find them at all. Then we end this now. We confront him, make it clear that harassing this family will cost him more than it's worth. Santos looked at Marcus with the expression of someone who'd seen too many good intentions go wrong. Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, you're a real estate developer. Damon Carter is a convicted felon with a history of violence and nothing to lose. You think you can intimidate him with lawyers and money? No, Marcus said quietly. But I think I can appeal to whatever's left of his humanity. And if there's nothing left, Marcus looked at his hands soft from years of office work and board meetings, then looked back at the clinic where 3 people he loved were hiding from a man who wanted to hurt them. Then, I guess we find out what I'm really made of. Before Santos could stop him, Marcus was out of the car and walking toward the clinic entrance. His heart hammered against his ribs. His mouth was dry with the kind of fear he hadn't felt since Emma's accident. The fear of losing people who mattered more than his own safety. The clinic's interior was a study in organized chaos. The main room had been divided into examination areas, using hospital curtains hung from the ceiling. Folding chairs lined the walls where patients waited their turns. Some reading Spanish-language magazines, others dozing or talking quietly with family members. The air smelled of antiseptic and hope. The particular atmosphere of a place where people came when they had nowhere else to go. Marcus approached the reception desk where a teenager with purple hair and multiple piercings was managing a clipboard-based system that somehow kept track of dozens of patients without a computer in sight. I'm looking for Kelly, Marcus said quietly. Kelly Williams. I'm a friend of hers. The teenager studied Marcus with the kind of street-smart suspicion that came from working in a place where people often weren't who they claimed to be. Kelly's busy with patients. You want to wait, or you want to come back later. It's urgent. Please. Tell her Marcus Thompson is here, and she needs to know that Damon Carter is in the neighborhood. The teenager's expression shifted from suspicion to alarm. Wait here. She disappeared behind one of the curtained areas. Marcus heard muffled conversation in both English and Spanish. A few minutes later, Keisha appeared, wearing scrubs that were too big for her and an expression of pure terror. What are you doing here? She whispered, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward a corner where they could speak privately. I've been looking for you for 3 days, Marcus said, keeping his voice low. When you disappeared from the hotel, I thought something had happened to you. Something did happen. Keisha's eyes darted toward the entrance, then back to Marcus. Damon found us. He came to the hotel asking questions. We had to leave. I know. And Keisha, he's here now. His car is parked 2 blocks away. We need to get you and the children somewhere safe. Keisha's face went pale. Are you sure I'm sure? I have a private investigator with me, and we've been watching the building. Damon's been circling the area for the past hour. Oh, God. Keisha pressed her hands to her face. Marcus could see her trying to think through the panic. Zara and Isaiah are in the back room. I told them we were safe here. I told them no one could find us. You are safe. But only if we move now before he makes his move. Keisha looked around the clinic, at the patients who depended on her care, at the other volunteers who'd welcomed her without asking questions about her past. I can't just leave. These people need help, and I can't keep running forever." "You're not running forever. You're buying time until we can find a permanent solution." "What kind of solution?" Marcus met her eyes. "The kind that makes sure Damon Carter never bothers you again." Before Keisha could respond, the teenager from the reception desk appeared at Marcus's shoulder, her face tight with worry. "Kelly, there's a man outside asking for you. Big guy, lots of gold jewelry. Says he's family." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. "Where is he exactly?" "Front entrance. Haven't let him in yet, but he's getting pushy about it." "Back exit?" Marcus asked. "Through the storage room, but it leads to an alley. If someone's watching, they'd see us leave." Marcus pulled out his phone and called Santos. "He's here. Front entrance. We need that backup now." 5 minutes out, Santos replied. "Can you keep him talking that long?" "I'll try." Marcus looked at Keisha, seeing his own fear reflected in her eyes. "Get the children. Stay in the back room until I come get you." "What are you going to do?" "Buy us time." Marcus walked towards the front entrance, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Through the brown paper covering the windows, he could see the silhouette of a large man pacing back and forth, his movements aggressive and impatient. Taking a deep breath, Marcus opened the door and stepped outside. Damon Carter was exactly what Marcus had expected, and worse than he'd imagined. 6'3" and built like someone who'd spent years lifting weights in prison. Tattoos covering his arms and neck in patterns that probably told stories Marcus didn't want to know. His eyes were the flat, cold gray of someone who'd learned to see other people as objects rather than human beings. "You must be Damon," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady. Carter looked Marcus up and down, taking in the expensive clothes and manicured appearance with obvious disdain. "And you must be the sugar daddy I keep hearing about. Marcus Thompson, right? The one who thinks he can buy himself a ready-made family. I'm someone who cares about Keisha and her children." "Keisha and her children," Carter repeated mockingly. "You mean my woman and my kid, because that's what they are no matter what fairy tale you've been telling yourself." "Isaiah isn't your son," Marcus said, "and Keisha isn't your anything." Carter's expression darkened. "You think your money makes you tough? You think you can just swoop in and take what's mine? I think you're a convicted felon who's violating the terms of his parole by stalking a woman and her children." "Stalking?" Carter laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "I'm visiting family. Nothing illegal about that." Marcus could hear sirens in the distance growing closer. Santos's backup was almost here. He just needed to keep Carter talking for another minute or two. "What do you want, Damon?" "I want what's owed to me. Marcus Johnson cost me a lot of money when he got himself arrested. His baby mama was supposed to help me get that money back, but instead she disappeared. Now she's going to make it right. She doesn't owe you anything. She owes me everything." Carter snarled, stepping closer. "You rich boys don't understand how the world really works. You think money solves everything, makes everyone equal. But there are rules down where I come from. And one of those rules is that debts get paid." The sirens were closer now, maybe 2 blocks away. Carter seemed to notice them too, his head turning toward the sound. Expecting company, he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Just some friends who don't like men who threaten children." Carter's hand moved toward his waistband. Marcus saw the outline of something metallic tucked under his shirt. A gun. Of course he had a gun. "You made a mistake getting involved in this," Carter said. "But it's not too late to walk away. Go back to your mansion. Forget you ever met these people, and we can all pretend this conversation never happened." "Not going to happen." "Then you're dumber than you look." The first police car rounded the corner, followed by 2 more. Carter saw them and smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "This isn't over," he said to Marcus. "You can't protect them forever. And when you're not around, when your cop friends aren't watching, I'll be there. Because unlike you, I've got nothing but time. Carter walked calmly toward his Escalade, showing no fear of the approaching police cars. Marcus realized with growing dread that the man was right. Unless he was arrested for something specific, Damon Carter could keep coming back, keep hunting, keep terrorizing Keisha and her children until someone made a mistake or got tired or stopped watching. Santos appeared at Marcus's side as the police cars pulled up to the clinic. "You okay?" the investigator asked. "For now. But he's not going to stop. This was just a warning. Then, we need to find a more permanent solution." Marcus watched Damon Carter drive away, disappearing into the LA traffic like a shark sliding back into deep water. Somewhere in the clinic behind him, Zara and Isaiah were probably scared and confused, wondering why the safe place their mother had found had suddenly become dangerous again. "What kind of permanent solution?" Marcus asked. Santos was quiet for a moment, watching the police officers spread out to secure the area, the kind that requires you to decide how far you're willing to go to protect your family. Your family. The words hit Marcus with unexpected force. When had he started thinking of them that way? When had Keisha become more than someone he was helping, and Zara and Isaiah become more than charity cases he was supporting? The answer came to him with crystalline clarity. The moment he'd realized he would rather face Damon Carter's threats than live in a world where they didn't exist. "As far as it takes," Marcus said quietly. Santos nodded. "Then we'd better start planning. Because men like Damon Carter don't give up, and they don't forgive. If we're going to end this, we need to be smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than he is." Marcus looked back at the clinic, where the woman he loved was comforting frightened children and trying to convince them that the world was still safe. For their sake, he was about to learn what he was really capable of when everything that mattered was on the line. The house in Malibu sat on 3 acres of oceanfront property, hidden behind high walls and accessible only through a gated driveway that wound through carefully maintained gardens. Marcus had bought it 5 years earlier as an investment property, planning to develop it into luxury condominiums. But the permits had been delayed, the market had shifted, and the house had remained empty. A Spanish-style villa with 6 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Pacific Ocean. Now, as Marcus led Keisha and the children through the front door, he was grateful for every bureaucratic delay that had left the house untouched. "This is where you live?" Zara asked, her voice echoing in the spacious foyer. "This is where we're going to live," Marcus replied, watching Keisha's reaction carefully. "All of us. For as long as it takes." Keisha stood in the entryway holding Isaiah, her expression unreadable as she took in the marble floors, the soaring ceilings, the artwork that cost more than most people made in a year. "Marcus, this is too much. We can't." "Yes, you can," Marcus interrupted gently. "And you will. Because this isn't charity anymore, Keisha. This is family." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them had been brave enough to voice. Santos had arranged the move with military precision, using multiple vehicles and decoy routes to ensure they weren't followed. The house had been swept for surveillance devices. The security system had been upgraded. A team of discreet bodyguards would monitor the perimeter 24 hours a day. Zara was already exploring, her footsteps pattering across the marble as she discovered room after room of space that seemed designed for children's games and adventures. Isaiah babbled happily in Keisha's arms, pointing at the crystals in the chandelier and clapping his hands when the afternoon sunlight made them sparkle. "The master bedroom is upstairs," Marcus said to Keisha. "There's a nursery next to it for Isaiah, and Zara can have her pick of the other bedrooms. I'll take one of the guest rooms downstairs. Where do you usually sleep, Beverly Hills? But I'll be staying here now if that's okay with you." Keisha looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Because of Damon. Because of you. All of you. Because I can't imagine going back to my empty house and pretending none of this matters to me. Before Keisha could respond, Zara came running back from her exploration, her eyes bright with excitement. Mama, there's a room with a piano and another room with nothing but books. And the kitchen has 2 refrigerators. 2 refrigerators? Keisha repeated faintly. And there's a pool, Zara continued. Can we go swimming? I know how. They taught us at the community center before we had to leave. Marcus looked at Keisha, seeing the war between gratitude and independence playing out across her face. He understood her struggle. Accepting help with hotel rooms and groceries was one thing. Living in a mansion that could house 20 families felt like crossing a line that might be impossible to uncross. Why don't you show me this piano? Marcus said to Zara, giving Keisha some space to process their new circumstances. The music room was Marcus's favorite space in the house. A circular room with windows on 3 sides and acoustics designed by the same firm that had worked on Disney Concert Hall. The piano was a Steinway Grand that had come with the house, probably worth more than most people's cars. Zara approached it with the reverence she might have shown a sleeping dragon. I don't know how to play, she said quietly. Neither do I, Marcus admitted. But maybe we could learn together. Really, really. We could find a teacher, take lessons. Would you like that? Zara nodded solemnly, then surprised Marcus by throwing her arms around his waist. Thank you, Mr. Marcus, for everything. For the hotel and the food in this house, and for keeping us safe from the scary man. Marcus knelt down so he was at eye level with her. Zara, I need you to understand something. You don't have to thank me for any of this. Taking care of people you love isn't something you do to get thanked. It's something you do because you can't imagine doing anything else. Do you love us? The question was asked with the direct honesty that only children possessed. It deserved an equally honest answer. Yes, Marcus said simply. I love all of you very much, even though we're not really your family. Marcus thought about how to answer that. You know what makes a family, Zara? It's not sharing the same blood or having the same last name. It's choosing to take care of each other no matter what. It's showing up when someone needs you, even when it's hard. It's love that you choose every single day. Zara considered this seriously. Then we are a family. Yes, Marcus said, feeling something settle in his chest that had been restless for 8 years. We are. That evening, after Zara had been tucked into a bedroom 3 times the size of the hotel room they'd all shared after Isaiah had been sung to sleep in a nursery that looked like something from a fairy tale, Marcus and Keisha sat on the terrace overlooking the ocean. The Pacific stretched endlessly before them, dark water reflecting moonlight like scattered diamonds. The sound of waves against the rocks below provided a soundtrack of peace that seemed impossible after the violence and fear of the past few days. I keep waiting for someone to tell me this isn't real, Keisha said softly. That houses like this don't happen to people like me, people like you, people who made bad choices, people who trusted the wrong men, people who ended up homeless with 2 children and no prospects. Marcus turned to look at her profile in the moonlight. You didn't make bad choices, Keisha. You made the best choices you could with the information you had. You trusted someone who lied to you, but that doesn't make you naive. It makes you human. And everything that happened after that, every decision you made to keep your children safe and together and alive, those were the choices of an extraordinary woman. I don't feel extraordinary. That's what makes you extraordinary. You saved them, Keisha. You saved yourself. You kept going when most people would have given up. They sat in comfortable silence. listening to the ocean and the distant sound of Zara talking to herself in her new bedroom. Probably making up stories about princesses who lived in castles by the sea. "What happens now?" Keisha asked eventually. "Now we build something," Marcus said. "Something permanent. Something that can't be taken away. Damon will keep coming. Let him come. This house is protected, and I'm not the same man who confronted him at the clinic. I've learned some things about myself over the past few days." Such as Marcus thought about the conversation he'd had with Santos that afternoon, about the private security firm they were hiring, about the legal strategies they were pursuing to ensure Damon Carter couldn't continue his harassment. But beneath all the practical preparations was something simpler and more fundamental. "I've learned that I'll do whatever it takes to protect my family," he said quietly. Keisha was silent for so long that Marcus wondered if he'd overstepped, if calling them his family was presumptuous or premature. But when she finally spoke, her voice was warm with something that might have been relief. "I've been alone for so long," she said, "taking care of everything, worrying about everything, being responsible for everything. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone else care about what happens to us. You're not alone anymore. What if I don't know how to not be alone? What if I'm too used to running to ever really stay anywhere?" Marcus reached over and took her hand, feeling the calluses from months of survival, the strength that had kept her children fed and safe when the world offered no help. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. "One day at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just see what happens when you don't have to be afraid anymore." Keisha squeezed his hand. "I'm still afraid. Of Damon. Of this. Of letting myself believe it's real. Of trusting that you won't change your mind when the novelty wears off." Marcus understood her fear because he'd been wrestling with his own version of it. What if he wasn't capable of being what Keisha and her children needed? What if his grief over Emma had damaged him too much to build something new? What if he was just playing at being a family man because it filled the emptiness in his life? But watching Zara discover the piano, seeing Isaiah's face light up when Marcus walked into a room, feeling Keisha gradually relax as she realized she didn't have to carry everything alone, these experiences felt more real than anything Marcus had done in years. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes," he said. "I can't promise I'll always know the right thing to do. But I can promise I won't change my mind. I can promise I won't leave, even when it gets hard, especially when it gets hard." A shooting star streaked across the sky above the ocean, visible for just a moment before disappearing into the darkness. Zara would have made a wish, Marcus thought. She would have squeezed her eyes shut and wished for something wonderful, with the absolute faith that children brought to magic and possibility. "What would you wish for, Marcus?" asked Keisha, nodding toward the sky where the star had been. Keisha was quiet for a moment, considering. "For this to last," she said finally. "For Zara and Isaiah to grow up feeling safe and loved. For a future that's better than the past. What about for yourself? I guess I'd wish for the courage to believe I deserve it." Marcus brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You deserve everything, Keisha. And I'm going to spend as long as it takes convincing you of that." As they sat together in the moonlight with the ocean singing its ancient song, and their children sleeping safely in rooms that would never echo with fear or hunger, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since Emma's death. The certainty that tomorrow would be better than today, and for the first time in 8 years, that was enough. The restraining order had been surprisingly easy to obtain once they'd documented Damon's harassment and connected it to his criminal history. The judge had been particularly concerned about the threat to children and had issued the broadest protection possible. No contact, no proximity, no third-party communication. More importantly, Santos had used his connections to ensure that Damon Carter's parole officer was aware of the situation. Any violation of the restraining order would result in immediate incarceration. No questions asked. For a man who'd already spent 2 years in prison, the threat was apparently sufficient deterrent. 6 months had passed since Damon's last appearance at the clinic. 6 months of gradually relaxing security of Keisha sleeping through the night, without checking the locks of Zara, making friends at her new school, without looking over her shoulder for familiar faces. The Malibu house had become more than a safe house. It had become home. Zara's piano lessons filled the music room with scales and simple melodies. Isaiah had taken his first independent steps across the marble foyer, much to everyone's delight. Keisha had returned to nursing, working at a clinic in Santa Monica that served low-income families with the kind of dignity and respect she'd always believed healthcare should provide. And Marcus had discovered what it meant to wake up with purpose beyond profit margins and development deals. He'd found meaning in Zara's homework questions, in Isaiah's bedtime stories, in Keisha's accounts of the patients she'd helped, and the small victories that made difficult days worthwhile. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Keisha struggled with accepting help after years of fierce independence. Zara sometimes had nightmares about the time they'd spent on the streets. Isaiah, too young to remember the worst of their circumstances, nonetheless seemed to require extra reassurance that the people he loved wouldn't disappear. But they were building something together. Not just recovering from trauma, not just establishing stability, but creating the kind of family that none of them had imagined possible during those desperate months of survival. It was during one of their regular evening walks on the beach that Marcus brought up the subject he'd been considering for weeks. "I've been thinking about making some changes," he said, watching Zara skip ahead of them while Isaiah toddled through the sand. "Legal changes." Keisha looked at him curiously. "What kind of changes?" "The kind that would make this official, permanent. The kind that would give you and the children the same legal protections as if you'd been born into this family." "Are you talking about adoption?" For Isaiah, yes. He's too young to remember any other father figure. As far as he's concerned, I'm his dad. And I'd like to make that legally true. What about Zara? That would be up to her. She's old enough to understand what it means, old enough to have opinions about changing her name or having me listed as her father on official documents. And me? Keisha asked quietly. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. The ocean breeze caught her hair, and the setting sun painted her skin in shades of gold and amber. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was the center of everything that made his life worth living. "I was hoping you'd marry me," he said simply. Keisha's eyes widened. "Marcus, I know it's complicated. I know there are practical considerations and emotional ones, and probably a dozen reasons why it doesn't make sense on paper. But Keisha, I can't imagine my life without you. I don't want to imagine it. What about Emma?" It was the question Marcus had been asking himself for months. How do you honor the memory of one love while building something new with another? How do you move forward without feeling like you're leaving something precious behind? "Emma will always be part of me," he said. "But she's part of my past, not my future. You're my future, Keisha. You and Zara and Isaiah and whatever we build together." Keisha was quiet for a long moment, watching their children play in the sand. Zara had found a piece of driftwood and was using it to draw elaborate pictures in the wet sand near the water's edge. Isaiah was fascinated by the waves squealing with delight each time the foam rushed over his bare feet. "What if I'm not good enough?" she asked finally. "What if I can't be the kind of wife you need, the kind of mother Zara and Isaiah deserve?" Marcus took her hands in his, feeling the strength in her fingers, the same hands that had kept her children alive through the darkest months of their lives. Keisha, you've already been the mother they deserve. You protected them when no one else would. You kept them together when the system wanted to separate them. You taught them to be kind and brave and hopeful even when you had every reason to give up hope yourself. But I have nightmares sometimes. I wake up in cold sweats thinking we're back under the bridge. I check the locks twice before bed. I still flinch when men raise their voices. And that makes you human, not damaged. It makes you someone who survived something terrible and is still capable of love and trust and building something beautiful. Zara came running back to them. Her drawing stick abandoned, her face bright with excitement. "Mama, Mr. Marcus, come see what I made." She led them to her sand creation, an elaborate castle, complete with towers, and a moat that filled with seawater, each time a wave reached it. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Keisha said, kneeling beside the castle. "It's for us," Zara explained. "A castle where families live happily ever after, like in the stories." Marcus met Keisha's eyes over their daughter's head. The word had slipped out naturally, unconsciously. Their daughter. As if Zara had always belonged to both of them. As if the legal paperwork was just catching up to an emotional reality that had been true for months. "Yes," Keisha said quietly. Her answer meant for both Zara's innocent observation and Marcus's marriage proposal. Like in the stories. The wedding was small, intimate, held on the beach behind their house, with the Pacific Ocean as their backdrop. Keisha wore a simple white dress that she'd chosen with Zara's enthusiastic input. Marcus wore a suit but went barefoot in the sand, a compromise that made Isaiah giggle throughout the brief ceremony. Zara served as maid of honor, taking her duties seriously and making sure everyone had flowers from the garden. Isaiah, not quite 2 years old, was supposed to be the ring bearer, but became distracted by a seagull and wandered off during the vows, requiring a brief pause while Santos retrieved him from the water's edge. The officiant was a friend of Marcus's from college, a minister who specialized in small, meaningful ceremonies. He spoke about how families are created not just by blood or law, but by choice, by commitment, by the daily decision to love and support each other through whatever challenges life might bring. When it came time for vows, Marcus spoke first. "Keisha," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "when I met you and your children, I thought I was helping you. I thought I was the one with something to offer. But you gave me something I'd lost and didn't think I'd ever find again. You gave me a reason to come home at the end of the day. You gave me the chance to be a father, to be a husband, to be part of something bigger than myself." He paused, looking at Zara and Isaiah, who were listening with the solemn attention that children bring to moments they sense are important. "I promise to love you and protect you and support your dreams, whatever they might be. I promise to be the kind of father Zara and Isaiah deserve and the kind of husband you deserve. I promise to remember that we're partners in this, that we're building something together, that your strength and my resources are meant to serve not just our family, but everyone whose path we cross." Keisha's vows were simpler, but no less profound. "Marcus," she said, her voice catching slightly, "I used to think that needing help made me weak, that accepting kindness made me a burden. You taught me that love isn't about owing someone something. It's about choosing someone every day, about building something beautiful together, about making each other stronger than we could ever be alone." She looked at their children, then back at Marcus. "I promise to trust you even when my past makes trust difficult. I promise to build this life with you, not just accept the life you're offering me. I promise to be your partner in making the world better for families like ours used to be, for children like Zara and Isaiah used to be." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small group of friends and family applauded. But the loudest cheer came from Zara, who threw flower petals in the air and announced to anyone who would listen, "Now we're officially a family." The adoption paperwork was completed 3 months later. Isaiah Thompson Williams, age 2. Probably wouldn't remember the ceremony in the judge's chambers, but Zara Thompson Williams, age 9, insisted on keeping her original middle name as a connection to her biological father and the complicated history that had shaped her early years. "I want to remember where I came from," she explained to the family court judge, who was impressed by her thoughtfulness. "But I also want everyone to know that Mr. Marcus, Daddy Marcus, is my real dad now." The judge, a woman who'd seen too many children shuttled through an overburdened system, smiled at Zara's earnest explanation. "That sounds like the perfect solution," she said. "Family names should tell the story of how you became a family, not just where you started." As Marcus signed the papers that made him legally responsible for Zara and Isaiah's welfare, education, and future, he felt the weight of promises that went far beyond legal obligations. These children had been entrusted to him, not just by the state of California, but by circumstances, by fate, by whatever force in the universe brought desperate people together at exactly the moment when they needed each other most. Dr. Keisha Thompson stood in the lobby of the newly opened Thompson Williams Community Health Center, watching her daughter, now 13, and poised beyond her years, address a group of medical students from UCLA. "Healthcare equity isn't just about money," Zara was saying, her voice carrying the confidence that came from growing up in rooms where important decisions were made. "It's about dignity. It's about seeing every patient as someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's whole world." The medical students scribbled notes and nodded thoughtfully, probably assuming they were listening to the child of doctors or academics. They had no way of knowing that the poised teenager speaking about healthcare access had once begged for milk in a convenience store, had once slept under bridges, had once promised to pay when she grew up with the kind of desperation that only comes from having nothing left to lose. Keisha caught Marcus's eye across the room. He was beaming with pride, the same expression he wore whenever any of their children achieved something remarkable. Isaiah, now 5 years old and fascinated by how things worked, sat in the front row with a notebook, drawing pictures of the medical equipment he could see and asking whispered questions about what everything was for. The clinic that bore Zara's name served over 2,000 patients a year, offering everything from basic preventive care to complex case management for families dealing with homelessness, immigration issues, and the kind of systemic poverty that made basic healthcare seem like an impossible luxury. Keisha had built the program from the ground up, hiring staff who understood that healing happened in the context of trust, respect, and genuine human connection. The waiting room was designed to feel more like a community center than a medical facility. Children's artwork covered the walls, comfortable seating arranged in conversation clusters rather than sterile rows. A play area where siblings could be entertained while parents received care. Everything about the space was intended to communicate one simple message: you belong here, you matter here, you are safe here. Dr. Thompson. One of the medical students raised her hand. "Can you tell us about the funding model? How do you make this sustainable?" "I'll let my husband answer that one," Keisha said, nodding toward Marcus. "He's the one who figured out how to make compassion profitable." Marcus stepped forward, still wearing the suit that marked him as someone who moved comfortably in boardrooms and investment meetings. But his approach to business had been fundamentally altered by his years of watching Keisha work with vulnerable populations. "The Thompson Williams Foundation operates on a hybrid model," he explained. "We receive traditional grants and donations, but we also generate revenue through partnerships with luxury developments. Every high-end project we build includes a community benefit component, funding for clinics like this one, affordable housing units, educational programs. Our wealthy clients pay a premium for the knowledge that their investment is creating positive change." "It's not charity," Keisha added. "It's justice. People who have benefited from certain economic systems have a responsibility to ensure those systems work for everyone. After the medical students left, Keisha and Marcus walked through the clinic together, checking in with staff and patients, reviewing cases that needed additional attention. This had become their evening ritual, a debriefing that served both professional and personal purposes, allowing them to stay connected to the work and to each other. Mrs. Garcia wants to know if you'll speak at her daughter's quinceañera, Dr. Patel mentioned as they passed the reception desk. Apparently, you're the reason Maria decided to pursue nursing. Keisha smiled. Maria Garcia had been one of their first patients, a 15-year-old who'd been acting as translator and medical advocate for her entire extended family. Instead of seeing this as a problem, Keisha had recognized Maria's natural gifts and helped her navigate the process of applying for college and healthcare career training. "Tell her I'd be honored," Keisha said, "and see if Maria needs any help with her applications." USC's nursing program is competitive, but she has exactly the kind of experience they're looking for. This was how change happened, Keisha had learned. Not through grand gestures or revolutionary policies, but through individual connections, one person at a time. Maria would become a nurse who understood what it felt like to navigate systems that weren't designed for people like her family. She would mentor other young women who would mentor others who would eventually transform healthcare from the inside out. As they drove home to Malibu, Marcus and Keisha talked about the expansion plans that would bring similar clinics to Long Beach and Riverside, about the legislative testimony Keisha had been asked to provide regarding Medicaid expansion, about the documentary crew that wanted to film at the clinic as part of a series about innovative healthcare delivery models. "Remember when our biggest worry was finding enough change for a gallon of milk," Keisha said, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink. "I remember thinking that was someone else's problem," Marcus replied. "I remember being the kind of person who wrote checks to charity galas and thought that was enough." What changed? Marcus considered the question as he turned into their driveway. Past the gates that had once been about keeping the world out, but now felt more like a boundary that kept their family safe enough to venture into the world and make a difference. "I met a little girl who promised to pay when she grew up," he said, "and I realized that some promises are worth keeping forever." The house had evolved over the years to accommodate their growing family and changing needs. Zara's room was now a teenager's domain, complete with a professional quality keyboard where she composed songs that addressed social issues with the kind of sophisticated musical arrangement that impressed her teachers at the performing arts high school she attended. Isaiah's room looked like mission control for a space program, filled with robotics kits and science experiments that suggested he'd inherited Marcus's analytical mind, along with Keisha's curiosity about how things worked. But the heart of the house remained the kitchen, where the family gathered each evening to share meals and stories, to argue about homework and chores, to plan weekend adventures, and discuss current events with the kind of passionate engagement that comes from knowing your voice matters. Tonight, Zara was working on a school project about income inequality, using data she'd gathered by interviewing clinic patients about their experiences accessing healthcare, education, and housing. Isaiah was building a robot that could sort recycling, determined to solve environmental problems through engineering. Both children approached their homework with the assumption that they could change the world, an assumption their parents had worked hard to cultivate. "Mom," Zara said, looking up from her laptop, "can you check this paragraph? I want to make sure I'm explaining the connection between zip code and life expectancy accurately." Keisha read over her daughter's shoulder, marveling at the sophistication of Zara's analysis and the mature way she discussed complex social issues. At 13, Zara was already thinking about college, about graduate school, about the specific ways she wanted to contribute to solving problems that had once threatened to destroy her family. "This is excellent," Keisha said, "but I think you could strengthen this section by including some of the stories from the clinic. Data is powerful, but stories help people understand what the data means for real families. "Can I interview you?" Zara asked, "about what it was like before Dad found us. I know it was hard, but I don't remember all the details." Keisha exchanged a glance with Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. They'd always been honest with the children about their history, age appropriately, but without sugarcoating the realities of homelessness and poverty. Both children knew they'd been lucky in ways that many families weren't, that their current security came with responsibilities to help others. "Of course," Keisha said, "but let me think about how to frame it. The point isn't to make people feel sorry for us. The point is to help people understand that homelessness can happen to anyone and that everyone deserves the chance to rebuild." "Like your speech at the clinic today," Zara said. "You talked about dignity." "Exactly. What made our situation different wasn't that we were somehow more deserving than other families. It was that we met someone who saw our humanity instead of just our circumstances." Isaiah looked up from his robot. "Dad, is that why you decided to help us? Because you saw Mom and Zara as humans instead of problems?" Marcus smiled at his son's direct question. Isaiah approached everything with scientific curiosity, wanting to understand the variables and motivations that led to particular outcomes. "Partly," Marcus said, "but mostly I helped because I needed to be needed. I had all this money and success, but I felt empty inside. Taking care of your family didn't just change your lives, it saved mine." "So it was selfish?" Isaiah asked, not judgmentally, but with genuine interest in understanding motivation. "All the best things people do are selfish in some way," Marcus replied. "The difference is whether your selfishness helps other people or hurts them. I felt better when I helped your family, so I kept doing it. But your mom and Zara and you made it possible by letting me into your lives." This was the story the children had grown up with. Not a fairy tale about rescue, but a more complex narrative about mutual support, about people finding what they needed in each other, about the ways individual kindness could ripple outward to create systemic change. Later that evening, after homework was finished, and Isaiah had been convinced to postpone his robotics project until morning, Keisha and Marcus sat on their terrace overlooking the ocean. The space had been transformed over the years into an outdoor living room, with comfortable furniture and heating elements that made it usable year-round. "Do you ever miss it?" Keisha asked. "The simplicity of just writing checks and attending galas. Do you ever miss just being responsible for yourself and your own problems?" Marcus countered. Keisha laughed. "Touché. Though I'm not sure I was ever just responsible for myself. Even when we were homeless, I was trying to take care of Zara and Isaiah and figure out how to help other families at the encampments." "That's what I love about you," Marcus said, pulling her closer. "You've never been able to see suffering and walk away from it. Even when you barely had enough for your own children, you were sharing food with other families. And you've never been able to see a problem without trying to solve it systematically. Even when you were grieving Emma, you were building housing for other families." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the ocean and the distant sound of Zara playing piano. She was working on an original composition, something she planned to perform at the school's showcase next month. The melody was complex but hopeful, like Zara herself. Sophisticated beyond her years, but fundamentally optimistic about the possibility of making the world better. "I got a call from 60 Minutes today," Marcus said casually. "They want to do a segment about the clinic network. How one family's experience with homelessness led to a new model for community health care." "What did you tell them?" "I told them I'd discuss it with my wife and daughter. It's their story too." Keisha considered the implications. Media attention could help expand their programs to other cities, could influence policy discussions about healthcare access and homelessness prevention, but it would also mean exposing their family's history to national scrutiny, potentially putting Zara and Isaiah in the spotlight in ways that might not be comfortable for them. "What does Zara think? I haven't asked her yet." But knowing Zara, she'll want to do it if she thinks it will help other families. That was true. Zara had inherited both parents' social consciousness, along with a teenager's conviction that problems existed to be solved. She volunteered at the clinic, tutored younger children at school, had recently started a peer counseling program for students whose families were dealing with economic instability. She gets that from you, Marcus observed. The inability to see injustice and do nothing about it. She gets that from all of us, Keisha replied. From you, from me, from the community we've built around her. She's grown up seeing that individuals can make a difference, that problems that seem overwhelming can be addressed one person at a time. Do you think we've given them too much responsibility? Expected them to care about too many things beyond their own lives? It was a question that kept both parents awake sometimes. How do you raise children to be socially conscious without burdening them with guilt about their privileges? How do you teach empathy without creating a sense of obligation that overshadows personal happiness? I think we've given them the tools to choose how they want to contribute, Keisha said finally. Zara could decide to become a musician who just happens to have grown up around social justice work. Isaiah could become a scientist who focuses on pure research instead of applied problem solving. The point is that they'll make those choices from a position of strength and security, not from desperation or limitation. And if they choose differently than we'd choose, then we'll support them completely. Just like you supported me when I wanted to move from survival to service. Marcus kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her hair and the salt air that had become the soundtrack of their life together. I love you, Dr. Thompson. I love you too, Mr. Thompson. Even if you did trick me into marrying someone who insists on trying to solve every problem in Los Angeles County. Only Los Angeles County. I was thinking of expanding to Orange County next year. Keisha laughed and settled more comfortably against his shoulder. This was what she'd wished for during those nights under the freeway overpass. Not wealth or luxury, but the simple security of being loved by someone who saw her as a partner rather than a burden. Someone who believed her dreams were worth supporting. Someone who would still be there when the dreams became reality. Marcus, she said softly. I kept my promise. What promise? To pay when I grew up. I didn't know what the payment would look like then. But I think this is it. The clinic, the work we do, the kids we're raising to make the world better. This is how I'm paying for that milk. Marcus tightened his arms around her. You've paid that debt 1,000 times over. It's not a debt anymore, Keisha said. It's an investment. And the returns just keep growing. Above them, the stars wheeled across the California sky. The same stars that had witnessed a desperate mother's promise in a convenience store. That had watched a lonely man discover what it meant to be needed. That had presided over the thousands of small choices that had transformed a moment of charity into a lifetime of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, new ways to expand the ripple effects of kindness that had started with a gallon of milk and a promise. But tonight, listening to their daughter play piano and knowing their son was dreaming of robots that could save the world, Keisha and Marcus Thompson were content to simply be grateful for the family they'd found in each other and the future they were building one day at a time. The auditorium at UCLA Medical School was packed beyond capacity. Students sitting in the aisles and standing along the walls to hear Dr. Zara Thompson deliver the keynote address at the social medicine conference. At 28, she was the youngest physician ever to address the gathering. But her reputation as both a practicing pediatrician and a policy advocate had earned her the platform. In the front row, Marcus and Keisha Thompson watched their daughter with the kind of pride that comes from seeing someone you love become exactly who they were meant to be. At 48, Keisha had expanded the community clinic network to 12 locations across Southern California. Her work had been recognized with everything from local humanitarian awards to a MacArthur Fellowship. Marcus, now 58, had transformed Thompson Real Estate into a B Corporation that balanced profit with social impact, proving that doing good business and doing good in the world weren't mutually exclusive. Healthcare is a human right, Zara was saying, her voice carrying the authority that came from both professional expertise and lived experience. But human rights don't mean much if they exist only in theory. They become real when we build systems that recognize every person's inherent dignity regardless of their ability to pay. Behind her, a large screen displayed a photograph that many in the audience had seen before. A convenience store in East LA. Unremarkable except for the small plaque beside the entrance that read, "Where promises are kept." 20 years ago, my mother stood in that store with my baby brother in her arms, and I promised to pay for our groceries when I grew up. Zara continued. I was 8 years old, homeless and desperate. I had no money, no prospects, and no reason to believe that promise would ever be kept. The auditorium was silent, except for the soft sound of people leaning forward, drawn into the story, despite having heard versions of it in medical journals and policy papers. But I did grow up, and I did pay. Not with money, though I've certainly bought plenty of groceries since then, but with service. With the understanding that debt and gratitude aren't individual transactions. They're community responsibilities. In the audience, Isaiah Thompson, now 21, and finishing his senior year in biomedical engineering at Caltech, recorded his sister's speech on his phone, planning to share it with the middle schoolers he mentored as part of his own commitment to paying forward the advantages their family had received. The man who bought our groceries that night didn't do it because he expected anything in return. Zara continued. He did it because he had the power to help and the wisdom to act. But the real miracle wasn't his generosity. It was what happened next. Instead of ending with charity, our story became about partnership. Instead of being rescued, we were invited to participate in our own salvation. Marcus reached for Keisha's hand, remembering that first night when he'd been struck by the simple power of Zara's promise. Neither of them had imagined then that the 8-year-old girl clutching a baby would grow up to become a voice for healthcare equity, that her childhood experience of desperation would become the foundation for a career dedicated to ensuring other children never faced similar circumstances. Today, the Thompson Williams Community Health Centers serve over 50,000 patients annually, Zara said, referring to the network that had grown from the single clinic to a model being replicated in cities across the country. But more importantly, they operate on the principle that healthcare is most effective when it addresses not just immediate medical needs, but the social determinants that create those needs in the first place. The slide behind her changed to show the interior of one of the clinics, where children played in bright, welcoming spaces while their parents received care from providers who understood that healing required more than just clinical expertise. Housing, nutrition, education, mental health services, job training. These aren't separate issues from healthcare. They're components of a comprehensive approach to human well-being, and they require all of us, medical professionals, policymakers, business leaders, community members, to see patients not as problems to be solved, but as partners in creating healthier communities. After the speech, during the reception that followed, dozens of medical students and young physicians approached Zara with questions, ideas, and requests for mentorship. She handled each conversation with the same attention she'd learned from watching her parents work. Genuine curiosity about each person's interests and experiences. Thoughtful responses that built on their ideas rather than dismissing them. Dr. Thompson. One resident said, I'm interested in community medicine, but I'm worried about the financial sustainability. How do you balance idealism with the practical realities of medical education? Debt. Zara smiled, recognizing the question that every socially conscious young physician struggled with. The Thompson Foundation offers loan forgiveness programs for physicians who commit to working in underserved communities, she said. But more than that, we need to change the conversation about what constitutes a successful medical career. Success isn't just about individual wealth. It's about the impact you have on the health of your community. Later, as the family drove home together, a tradition they'd maintained, even as the children became adults with their own lives, they talked about the speech. The questions from students, the policy implications of the healthcare reform proposals Zara had outlined. I'm proud of you, Keisha told her daughter. Not just for the speech, but for the way you handled all those questions afterward. You made each person feel like their concerns mattered. I learned that from watching you at the clinic, Zara replied. And from Dad at his board meetings. Every person deserves to feel heard, even if you can't give them everything they're asking for. Isaiah, who had been quiet during the drive, finally spoke up. Do you ever feel pressure to live up to the story? Like everyone expects you to be this symbol of overcoming adversity, but you're just trying to be a good doctor? It was a perceptive question from someone who'd grown up as part of a family narrative about redemption and social responsibility. How do you maintain individual identity when your personal story has become a public inspiration? Sometimes, Zara admitted. But then I remember that the story isn't really about me. It's about what's possible when people choose to see each other's humanity instead of each other's circumstances. I just happened to be the kid who made the promise. And kept it. Marcus added quietly. We all kept it. Zara corrected. Mom kept it by building the clinics. Dad kept it by changing how business can serve communities. Isaiah's keeping it by designing technology that makes healthcare more accessible. We've all found our own ways to pay forward what we received. The house in Malibu looked the same from the outside, but the interior had evolved to reflect the lives of the people who called it home. Zara's medical school diplomas hung in the hallway next to Marcus's business awards and Keisha's humanitarian recognitions. Isaiah's robotics trophies shared shelf space with family photos from graduations, weddings, and the kinds of ordinary celebrations that mark a life well lived. But the heart of the house remained the kitchen, where the family still gathered for Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, and the kind of impromptu conversations that happen when people who love each other share space comfortably. Tonight, as they settled around the familiar table with takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant, some traditions never change. The conversation turned to future plans. Isaiah would be starting graduate school at MIT in the fall, working on biomedical devices that could provide diagnostic capabilities in resource-limited settings. Zara was considering a fellowship in global health, with the possibility of spending a year establishing community clinics in rural areas of Central America. What about you two? Zara asked her parents. Any grand plans for your empty nest years? Marcus and Keisha exchanged a look that suggested they'd been discussing this question privately. Actually, Keisha said we've been talking about expanding internationally. There are organizations in Kenya and Guatemala that have expressed interest in adapting our clinic model to their communities. You're thinking of moving abroad? Isaiah asked, looking alarmed at the prospect of his parents being even further away than the current distance between Los Angeles and Boston. Not permanently, Marcus clarified, but maybe spending part of each year working directly with communities that are developing their own healthcare systems. Your mother has insights that could help a lot of people, and your father has resources that could make those insights sustainable, Keisha added. Plus, we're not getting any younger. If we're going to do something adventurous, now is the time. The conversation continued late into the evening, covering everything from practical logistics of international development work to philosophical questions about the responsibilities that come with privilege and expertise. It was the kind of discussion that had been happening around this table for years. Thoughtful, passionate, grounded in the belief that individuals have both the opportunity and the obligation to contribute to positive change. Finally, as midnight approached and the family began to disperse to their respective bedrooms, Zara lingered in the kitchen with her parents. "I want to show you something," she said, pulling out her phone and opening a video message. This came in response to today's speech. The video showed a young woman, probably in her early 20s, sitting in what looked like a hospital break room. "Dr. Thompson." The woman said, "My name is Maria Gonzalez, and I'm a nursing student at USC. 5 years ago, your mother helped my family access health care when we couldn't afford it anywhere else. Today, after hearing your speech, I wanted you to know that I'm graduating next month, and I'll be working at a community clinic in East LA. I'll be taking care of families like yours used to be, like mine used to be. Thank you for showing me what's possible when people keep their promises." Keisha wiped away tears as the video ended. Maria was one of our first patients at the original clinic. 15 years old, translating for her grandmother, scared, but so determined to help her family. "And now she's a nurse," Marcus said with satisfaction. "The ripples keep spreading." "That's how change really happens," Zara observed. "One person at a time, one family at a time, one community at a time. You help someone, they help someone else, and eventually the whole world is a little bit better." As they turned off the lights and headed upstairs, Keisha paused at the kitchen window that looked out over the Pacific Ocean. Somewhere out there, she knew were other families facing the same challenges her family had once faced. Parents trying to keep their children safe and fed. Children growing up too fast because circumstances demanded it. People who'd lost hope in the possibility that things could ever be different. But also out there were people like Maria Gonzalez and the medical students who'd approached Zara after her speech, and the thousands of other individuals who'd been touched by their story and chosen to use it as inspiration for their own service. The promise that had begun with a desperate 8-year-old and a gallon of milk had grown into something larger than any of them could have imagined. A network of caring that stretched across communities and generations. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, joining her at the window. "I'm thinking about promises," Keisha said. "How they start small and personal, but they don't stay that way if you honor them properly." Zara kept her promise. We all did, and so will the people who come after us. Marcus put his arm around his wife, looking out at the same ocean they'd gazed at on their first night in this house, when they were still learning to trust that good things could last. "Emma would have loved this," he said quietly. "She would have loved watching Zara become a doctor, seeing Isaiah design things that help people, knowing that our family became something that makes the world better." "She did love it," Keisha replied. "She loved it through you. Every clinic we built, every family we helped, every young person we mentored. That was Emma's love continuing to ripple out through your choices." They stood together in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other in a moment of desperation and built something beautiful from the ruins of their separate grief. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, new ways to honor the promise that had brought them together. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of lives well lived and love well shared, they were content to simply be grateful for the journey that had led them here, and the legacy they were leaving for generations not yet born. Outside, the ocean whispered its ancient songs of continuity and change. Inside, a family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that promises kept with love create ripples that never end. And somewhere in Los Angeles, in communities around the world, people who'd been touched by their story were making their own promises, finding their own ways to pay forward the kindness they'd received, ensuring that the simple act of caring for one another would continue long after any individual story had ended. The promise to pay when I grow up had been kept, again and again, in ways that multiplied exponentially with each person who chose compassion over indifference, service over selfishness, hope over despair. It was the best kind of payment, the kind that grew with interest, forever.